The Battle of Chippewa, July the 5th, 1814. On July the 5th, 1814, a British force under Major-General Phineas Riall confronted an invading American army under Major-General Jacob Brown near the Chippewa River, today's Welland River, on the Canadian side of the Niagara River. This is what happened. On July the 3rd, 3,500 American troops crossed the Niagara River into Canada and quickly captured Fort Erie, which was defended by only 140 men from the 8th Regiment under Major Thomas Buck. On July the 4th, the 4th of July, an American brigade under Brigadier General Winfield Scott proceeded north along the Niagara River, only to be harassed and stonewalled all the way to the Chippewa by a small number of native warriors, plus the flank companies of the 100th Regiment, under the overall command of the aggressive Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Pearson. When Scott's men arrived at the Chippewa, they found the bridge had been damaged, the air full of smoke from burning buildings, and with British artillery pointed at them, the Americans called it a day, and were joined overnight by the rest of Brown's army. On the morning of July 5th, the opposing armies were encamped on both sides of the Chippewa River, separated by a wide plain with the Niagara River on the eastern flank and thick woods to the west. The British, under General Riall, had 1,800 men, while the Americans had at least 1,500 more. Action begins around 3:30 p.m. when General Brown sent a small force of militia and native allies under Brigadier General Peter B. Porter through the woods to drive off enemy snipers, which they do, only to emerge to a massive discharge of British musketry. British musketry. The British are coming! The British are coming! In the words of author D.R. Westhouse, quote, Riall, attempting to attack Brown, had sent a number of troops forward on his right to occupy the American left in a flanking movement designed to draw attention from his main assault. Riall hoped to catch the Americans unaware and in their camp, but Porter discovered his advance when he stumbled onto the main line as it was assembling for the assault. End of quote. Alerted, General Brown ordered General Scott to prepare his men, who had been preparing to drill, to prepare for battle instead. Moving onto the plain, and in spite of casualties inflicted by the British artillery, the Americans form up with the 25th Infantry Regiment over by the woods, the 11th Regiment in the center, and the 9th and 22nd Regiments on the right, while Captain Nathan Townsend, Towson, set up his battery on the road by the Niagara River. The arrival of the Americans would give birth to an urban legend. Why, these are regulars! As part of his efforts to turn his troops into professional soldiers, Scott insisted they be provided with proper uniforms, only to receive a large number of single-breasted gray jackets instead of the standard blue coatee. That's a coatee, C-O-A-T-E-E. So when General Riall first observed the gray-clad Americans, he assumed they were militia that could be easily driven off. But when they stood and fought, he supposedly said, Why, these are regulars! The British had formed into line with the 1st Royal Scots on the right, the 100th Regiment on the left, with the 8th King's Own Regiment held in reserve. The opposing lines then moved to within 100 yards of each other, and around 4:15 p.m. the fight was on. Captain Towson's Riverside Battery fought a duel with the British artillery before concentrating on the Redcoats with devastating effect. As well, rapid and accurate fire by the American infantry also took its toll and left Riall with no choice but to withdraw, the British troops retreating in good order, eventually heading to Fort George, Fort Mississauga, and to 20 Mile Creek. The butcher's bill for this intense one-hour battle? The British lose 148 dead, 321 wounded, and 46 missing in action, some of whom were wounded left on the battlefield. But the Americans were not unscathed, with 58 killed, 241 wounded, and 19 missing. The Battle of Chippewa marked the first time American regulars defeated British regulars during the War of 1812, a victory which has produced yet another urban legend, that the gray uniforms worn by the cadets at West Point are based on the gray uniforms worn by the Americans at Chippewa. For the truth of the matter, see Redcoats and Gray Jackets by Donald E. Graves. This has been a very truncated account of the Battle of Chippewa, based on the account found in my go-to guide, D.R. Westhouse's unpublished The War of 1812, a chronology of the military actions 1812 to 1815, and I hope you found it more enlightening than confusing. As usual, all errors are strictly my own. For a more detailed understanding of the battle, I highly recommend Redcoats and Gray Jackets by Canadian historian Donald E. Graves, and the account of the battle in Richard Feldhau's The Tide of War, the 1814 invasions of Upper Canada. The thing I like about all of Feldhau's books are the excellent maps which allow you to follow the action, and his inclusion of detailed order of battle and casualty figures for both sides. The battle is also discussed in John Norton's autobiography, a Mohawk memoir from the War of 1812, as Norton was an active participant in the engagement. As well, I put links to a number of interesting videos about the battle in the description. The Battle of Lundy's Lane, July the 25th, 1814. On July the 25th, 1814, British, Canadian, and American forces fought the most intense and bloody battle of the Niagara campaign of 1814 at Lundy's Lane, then a farm lane, now a major street in Niagara Falls, Ontario. This is the story of that confrontation, based on the account in the unpublished The War of 1812, a chronology of the military actions 1812 to 1815 by D.R. Westhouse. But, as always, any errors are strictly my own. Following defeat at the Battle of Chippewa, British Commander Phineas Riall withdrew his forces to Fort George, Burlington Heights, and various creeks throughout the Niagara. The Americans under Jacob Brown followed, hoping to rendezvous with Isaac Chauncey and the U.S. Navy, Brown's men stopping at Queenston Heights. But instead of Chauncey, it is the Royal Navy that shows up. With his plans thwarted, Brown withdrew to Chippewa and began collecting supplies from Fort Schlosser on the New York side of the Niagara River in preparation for for a proposed overland attack on Burlington Heights. As Brown withdrew, Riall, of course, followed, setting up camp by a churchyard atop a rise near Lundy's Lane. On July the 25th, Brigadier General Winfield Scott received permission to take his brigade to reconnoiter the British position, only to find battle instead. Riall had about 1,800 men, plus artillery, and had initially withdrawn upon Scott's approach, but Lieutenant General Gordon Drummond arrived with reinforcements and countermanded the order, the British reoccupying the rise. At around 7:15 p.m., Scott's men appeared and came under heavy fire, so he sent a request to Brown to bring up the bulk of the American army. First to arrive was the 25th Infantry, under Major Thomas Jessup, who was sent right and managed to push back the British left flank, capturing a number of officers, including General Riall. In order to straighten out his lines, Drummond pulled back his center, away from his guns atop the rise, as Brown appeared, Brown sending Lieutenant Colonel James Miller of the 21st Infantry to capture the guns. Miller's reply to Brown was the famous, "I'll try, sir." After failing several times, the 9th and 23rd Infantry, under Brigadier General Elijah Ripley, successfully attacked the British lines as Miller's men captured the guns, driving the British back. The 9th, 11th, and 23rd Infantry finding themselves in heavy fighting against the Glengarry Light Infantry, the 104th Regiment, and some elements of the Royal Scots. According to D.R. Westhouse, quote, General Drummond reformed his line and pushed forward with his dragoons, militia, the 1st, the 41st Light Company, the 41st Regiment's Light Company, the 89th and 104th Regiments, and the Glengarry Light Infantry. Firmly entrenched on the hill were the 9th, 11th, 21st, and 22nd U.S. Infantry Regiments, along with Captain Nathan Towson's battery. End of quote. Westhouse goes on to note that the American right was held by the 25th Infantry and Captain Thomas Biddle's battery, the left by Brigadier General Peter B. Porter's brigade and John Ritchie's artillery. As darkness fell, the fighting was up close and personal, with heavy losses on both sides. Running low on ammunition, and with both General Brown's and Scott wounded, command devolved upon General Ripley, who made the decision to withdraw around midnight, leaving the British guns behind. In the morning, Ripley pulled the Americans back to Fort Erie, while Drummond followed but did not attack the retreating army. Both sides were simply too exhausted. Westhouse records the butcher's bill as follows. American, 171 killed, 572 wounded, 110 missing in action. British/Canadian, 84 dead, 559 injured, 235 missing or captured. Total casualties, 1,386 killed or wounded. Yikes! So, who won this fight, during which the two opponents beat themselves bloody? While some suggest that Lundy's Lane was a draw, I think you have to give the victory to the British side, as the Americans withdrew and failed to take the British guns with them. But what do you think, dear listeners? What do you think? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. This has been a very truncated account of the Battle of Lundy's Lane, and I fear it may be more confusing than enlightening. For a better understanding of the engagement, allow me to recommend 1. A Crucible of Fire, The Battle of Lundy's Lane, July the 25th, 1814, by Richard Feltow. Like all books by that author, it is filled with order of battle information and detailed maps which allow you to follow the battle step by step. And 2. Where Right and Glory Lead, The Battle of Lundy's Lane, 1814, another excellent narrative account by Canadian historian Donald E. Graves. My copy is signed by the author, who dedicated it to Sergeant David Westhouse of the 1st Foot, a.k.a. the Royal Scots. The Siege of Fort Erie, 1814. The Battle of Fort Erie took place at Fort Erie, Ontario, directly across the Niagara River from downtown Buffalo, New York. The battle occurs on August the 15th, 1814, but a series of actions will take place before and after the battle and will end with the Americans withdrawing from Upper Canada. Hence, I refer to it as the Fort Erie Campaign. The campaign begins August the 2nd/3rd with the Battle of Black Rock. Note, the engagements recounted in this video are based on the entries regarding Fort Erie in D.R. Westhouse's unpublished The War of 1812, A Chronology of the Military Actions, 1812 to 1815. At midnight, August the 2nd, 600 British troops crossed the Niagara River to the New York side in an attempt to force the Americans to leave the security of Fort Erie and fight, or, failing that, to at least destroy the Yankee batteries at Black Rock. Alas, the British find themselves stymied by U.S. riflemen firing from strong defensive positions at Skagwada Creek. British Commander Lieutenant General Gordon Drummond sends reinforcements, but to no avail, and in the end, the Redcoats withdraw, having suffered 12 killed, 21 wounded, with 6 missing in action. American casualties are 2 dead, 8 injured. The Americans, under General Elijah Ripley, who had assumed command after Generals Brown and Scott were both wounded at Lundy's Lane, had withdrawn to the safety of Fort Erie. But Drummond followed, determined to drive the Yankees back across the Niagara River. In the meantime, Ripley was replaced on August the 5th by General Edmund P. Gaines from Sackett's Harbor. As the British had begun to emplace siege batteries to shell the fort, Gaines sent American riflemen on both August the 6th and 10th to reconnoiter the artillery positions and draw the Redcoats into battle. But while the riflemen inflict a number of British casualties, they failed to provoke them, and on August the 12th, an attack by the riflemen on a British work party results in the combat death of their commander, Major Ludwig Morgan, Ludwig being spelled Lodowwick, but I'm assuming it's pronounced Ludwig. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong. On August the 13th, the British artillery opened up and continued firing until just before the assault began, August the 15th. They were answered by American batteries from the fort and from Black Rock, while Porcupine, a small Yankee schooner, raked the British positions with grape shot. On the 14th, a British hit on a small powder magazine makes a big noise, but does little to damage the American position. Note, 2 other U.S. ships at Fort Erie, the Somers and Ohio, were taken out of the grape shot equation by a daring British raid which captured them on August 12th. The British will sail both ships to Chippewa to guard their camp. The attack on Fort Erie begins just after 2 a.m. on the 15th. British commander Lieutenant General Gordon Drummond had 2,100 troops and had come up with a complicated plan involving a simultaneous assault on the fort by 3 separate columns. 1,300 men under Lieutenant Colonel Victor Fisher were to take the Snake Hill Battery on the American left. The men had removed the flints from their muskets to prevent noise and would rely on surprise and the bayonet to take the enemy position. Alas, it's really hard for 1,300 men to sneak up on you, and they soon lost the element of surprise. In addition, the Redcoats encountered a series of obstacles that forced them to wade in the nearby water in an attempt to flank the American position. But General Ripley, who had anticipated such a move, had placed underwater obstacles to check their advance. Even worse, the ladders they had brought to scale the walls of the fort were found to be too short, and with no musket flints, the Redcoats couldn't even shoot back. Fisher's men charged 5 times, to no avail, and some 150 are captured. On the American right, the 550 men under a colonel with the awesome name of Hercules Scott. Hercules Scott assault the Douglas Battery only to encounter intense fire from the defenders. The brave men mount 2 attacks, but after the death of Hercules are forced to retreat. In the center, Lieutenant Colonel William Drummond's men, he was a distant relative of General Drummond, penetrated the fort's north bastion, but after an intense firefight lasting nearly an hour, the world exploded in a shower of wood, rock, and body parts. A large powder magazine below the bastion had ignited, and that was that. William Drummond was killed during the firefight. The final cost of the August 15th battle? Westhouse says the British lost 222 dead, 174 wounded, 186 captured. The Americans, 17 killed, 56 injured, 11 MIA. Things didn't stop there, of course. In the wee small hours of September the 17th, American Commander Jacob Brown launched a 2-pronged attack from the fort to neutralize the British siege artillery. In poor weather with heavy rain, the U.S. forces achieved surprise, destroying the enemy batteries and blockhouses, only to be attacked by British reinforcements, the fighting becoming confused in the darkness, rain, and smoke. Pursued by the British, the Americans returned to the fort, having achieved their objectives. The cost? The Americans lose 79 dead, 216 wounded, 216 captured, while the British, 115 dead, 148 wounded, with about 400 men taken prisoner. Plus, the Redcoats lose all their cannon. So on September the 21st, Drummond lifts the siege and his men return to base at Chippewa. In October, Major-General George Izard takes overall U.S. command. Izard wants to dislodge Drummond from his base at Chippewa, but couldn't. Learning of a British supply dump at Cook's Mills on Lyons Creek in present-day Welland, Ontario, on October the 18th, Izard dispatched 900 men under Brigadier General Daniel Bissell to destroy it. Bissell's men drive off the British guards and decide to camp for the night, but after midnight, their pickets are attacked by the Glengarry Light Infantry. The Americans drive them off, but the Redcoats return the morning of the 19th with a force of 1,200 men. The result, an intense firefight, ending in a British withdrawal, the British having been ordered not to fully engage. The Redcoats lose 1 dead, with 18 wounded or missing, but the Americans suffer 13 killed, plus 53 injured. After destroying 200 bushels of grain, the Yanks head back to Fort Erie, which the Americans abandoned on November 5th, ending the Fort Erie campaign and the last U.S. invasion of Canada. After 125 days, the Niagara campaign of 1814 was over. Winter's a-comin', and even a mild Niagara winter is no fun, as I know from personal experience. If this is your first visit to 1812 channel, my name is Warren and I'm your host. I'm not a historian, nor am I an expert on the War of 1812. Instead, I'm a student wishing to learn about the conflict. Each month, for the roughly 3 years of the war, I will outline the major events. I will also review a book on the war. Did I miss anything? Any errors? Then let me know in the comments below. Today's footage, courtesy of Dr. Anne Marie James, shows the War Memorial on the grounds of the Saskatchewan Legislature. The Battle of Plattsburgh and Lake Champlain. September 11th, 1814. Plattsburgh is one of the lesser-known battles in the War of 1812, but it was a battle of great significance. Here's why. This account of Plattsburgh is largely based on the description of the battle found in my go-to source, D. R. Westhouse's unpublished The War of 1812, a chronology of the military actions 1812 to 1815. Like most battles in the War of 1812, the action at Plattsburgh is complicated, but here goes nothing. On September 1st, a British army of 10,351 men under command of Lieutenant General Sir George Prevost, Governor-General of the Canadas, had crossed the border from Canada, reaching Plattsburgh, New York on September the 6th. Earlier, in August 1814, American General George Izard had, under protest, marched his army of 4,000 to Sackett's Harbor, leaving Plattsburgh defended by a force of only 3,500 militia and men unfit for duty under the command of General Alexander Macomb. The cautious Sir George believed he needed the help of the Royal Navy to ensure a successful assault, Plattsburgh being on Lake Champlain. But the sailors were not ready, much to Sir George's displeasure. Thus the British army dug in and waited, while the Yanks also dug in and built up both their defenses and their number of defenders, i.e., they got more troops. The naval battle began at around 9 a.m. on September 11th with the attack of the British squadron, even though their commander, Captain Gordon Downey, not to be confused with the singer, believed his men, some of whom were not actual sailors and who were largely untrained, were not ready for action, but Prevost had been insistent. Downey's ships included the recently completed 37-gun Confiance, the 16-gun Linnet, Chubb 11 guns, Finch 10, plus 12 gunboats. Their adversary, the American squadron under Master Commandant Thomas McDonough, featured the 26-gun Saratoga, Eagle 20, Ticonderoga 17, Preble 7, and 10 gunboats. In the words of D. R. Westhouse, quote, having arrived days before the British, McDonough had anchored his command to force the British to come to him and allow his vessels to react quickly and turn either broadside to bear as needed. End of quote. Wikipedia notes, quote, the ships were anchored in line from north to south in the order Eagle, Saratoga, Ticonderoga, and Preble. They had both bow and stir anchors with springs attached to the anchor cables to allow the ships to be slewed through a wide arc. McDonough had also laid out extra kedge anchors from the quarters of his flagship, Saratoga, which would allow him to spin the ship completely around. End of quote. The British ships attacked head-on, and for 2 hours both sides slugged it out, and, according to Westhouse, quote, the wind died down, reducing the ability of the British to maneuver. With the ships engaged at close quarters, the Americans, with their short-range weapons, took the upper hand. End of quote. One by one, the British ships struck their colors and surrendered, Captain Downey having been killed early in the engagement when he was crushed by a cannon knocked from its mount by a shot from the Saratoga. On land, the attack did not begin until 10 a.m., but when Prevost learned the Navy had lost, he called the whole thing off and ordered a retreat, despite the fact his troops outnumbered the Americans 3-1. Overall, on both land and water, the U.S. loses 84 dead and 121 wounded, the British 92 killed and 147 injured. But the Redcoats also suffer some 300 deserters, some of whom will no doubt join the other team. Wikipedia suggests that Prevost withdrew as, quote, he realized that without the Navy to supply and support his further advance, any military advantage gained by storming Plattsburgh would have been worthless. End of quote. Well, maybe so, but the unexpected retreat does damage to A. British morale. Prevost's men, which include many veterans of Wellington's army, were mortified when their commander appeared to give up and turn tail. And all those desertions, my. B. Great Britain's bargaining position at the peace talks. The British negotiators in Ghent had presented a list of sweeping and humiliating peace demands to their American counterparts, following the burning of Washington, only to be undercut by British setbacks at both Baltimore and Plattsburgh. And finally, C. Sir George's reputation. As historian Alan Taylor notes in The Civil War of 1812, quote, at Plattsburgh, the Americans dodged a catastrophe because caution froze Prevost, as it had at Sackett's Harbor in 1813. But this time, Prevost faced powerful critics, his subordinate generals, who were used to Wellington's aggressive and victorious style in Europe. Yeo, as in Sir James Yeo, Commodore of the British fleet on Lake Ontario, Yeo also blamed Prevost for pressuring Captain Downey to attack prematurely. Prevost's military critic found political allies in Canada's militant Anglophones who resented his generous treatment of French Canadians. A vicious letter-writing campaign by the critics spilled into the previously docile Canadian press. Some writers revived the canard that Prevost was a closet traitor, as his parents were American. Actually, they were Swiss. And true Republicans. Dismayed by the infighting, the imperial lords would recall both Prevost and Yeo to England in the spring. End of quote. D.R. Westhouse suggests that the unexpected defeat handed control of Lake Champlain to the Americans and disrupted British plans to, quote, drive a wedge between New England and the rest of the United States. End of quote. All gone. All gone. Thus, Plattsburgh, whilst one of the lesser-known battles of the War of 1812, was an engagement of great significance. Sir George Prevost was a physically brave man, but he appears to have been better suited to the role of political administrator as opposed to military commander. In the words of historian Wesley B. Turner, quote, when leading in combat, Prevost had demonstrated his overwhelming concerns to avoid defeat and preserve the army rather than to battle on under difficult conditions. End of quote. In other words, sure victory without casualties or risk. If only it was that easy. But what do you think, dear listeners? What is your opinion of the leadership of Sir George Prevost? Why did he retreat at Plattsburgh? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this is your first visit to 1812 channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren and I'm your host. I'm not a historian, nor am I an expert on the War of 1812. Instead, I'm a student wishing to learn about the conflict. So please subscribe, drop a like, or comment. Let's turn this channel into a discussion community about the War of 1812. Did I miss anything? Any errors? Then let me know in the comments below. And when the barrage lifts, cheers! Pictures used in today's video, courtesy of Pix here, that's PX here, while the music is by Kevin MacLeod. I just haven't figured out which piece I'm going to use yet, but I'll let you know in the description. Cheers.